I never told my daughter about the $120,000 I earn every month, even though she grew up seeing me live what looked like a simple, almost struggling life. One day, she invited me to dinner at my own flagship restaurant with her new husband's wealthy parents, who were flying in from Chicago. I had a feeling they were the kind of people who judged others by their clothes and bank accounts, so I decided to test them. I showed up dressed like a broke, timid widow, thrift store dress, worn-out shoes, faded tote bag, and pretended to be exactly what they expected, poor and naive. But the moment I walked through the doors of Sterling's Pinnacle, everything shifted. What happened that night left my son-in-law's family devastated in a way they never saw coming. And believe me, they had it coming. Let me take you back and tell you who I really am. My name is Alina Sterling. I'm 58 years old, a widow, and to my 25-year-old daughter Emily, I've always been just Mom, the retired bookkeeper who lives quietly in a modest apartment in Queens, clips coupons, buys clothes on sale, and never splurges on anything flashy. She never knew the truth. To her, I was the woman who came home tired from a quiet office job, cooked simple meals, and kept an old leather handbag until the straps nearly fell apart. I never corrected that picture. Why would I? I didn't need her to see me as rich. I needed her to grow up strong, independent, and kind, values no amount of money can buy. The real story is this. I own Sterling & Co., an ultra-luxury restaurant chain with locations across the country. Our flagship, Sterling's Pinnacle in Manhattan, is the kind of place where celebrities book private rooms months in advance, where a single tasting menu can run $600 a person, and where the wine list starts at 4 figures. I built it all from nothing. At 23, pregnant and abandoned by Emily's father with my own family turning their backs, I started as a hostess in a tiny diner. I worked nights, studied business during the day, saved every penny, and climbed one promotion, one smart investment, one bold risk at a time, until I owned my first restaurant, then a second, then an entire brand. Today my company is worth over $400 million, and I clear $120,000 a month after taxes. But I still live in the same quiet Queens apartment, drive a 10-year-old car, and wear clothes most people would donate. True wealth to me isn't about showing off. It's about freedom, security, and peace. So when Emily called me that Tuesday, her voice tight and nervous, asking if I'd join them for dinner at Sterling's Pinnacle to meet her new husband Ethan's parents, Vanessa and Frank Parker, who were coming in from Chicago, I heard something underneath her words. It wasn't excitement, it was worry. She told me Ethan had described me as simple and living modestly. The word simple stung, but I understood. She was trying to manage expectations. I could almost hear the unspoken plea. Please don't embarrass us, Mom. I told her I'd be there. And in that moment, a plan formed. If they were the type to look down on someone they thought was poor, I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to feel how they treated a woman they believed had nothing. So I dug out the oldest, most shapeless dress I owned, scuffed shoes, no jewelry, hair in a messy bun, and an old canvas tote. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly what I wanted them to see. A tired, forgettable widow barely getting by. As the cab pulled up to the glowing entrance of Sterling's Pinnacle, my restaurant, my creation, I felt a strange mix of calm and anticipation. I paid the driver in cash, stepped out, and walked through those doors knowing that tonight, everything was about to change. But what I didn't expect was just how cruel they would be or how perfectly my plan would expose them. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of my mirror one last time, smoothing down the faded gray dress that hung shapelessly on my frame. It was something I'd picked up years ago from a thrift shop in Queens, perfect for the role I was about to play. No makeup, no jewelry, hair pulled back in a loose, slightly messy ponytail. I looked exactly like a woman who had spent decades scraping by, tired eyes, worn shoes, and that old canvas tote slung over my shoulder. I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The ride into Manhattan felt longer than usual. As the cab crossed the bridge, the skyline lit up ahead of me, towers of glass and steel that I'd watched grow over the years while building my own quiet empire. Sterling's Pinnacle sat in the heart of it all, a sleek building with warm golden lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed between luxury cars, and well-dressed couples stepped out laughing. I paid the driver with small bills from my old wallet, stepped onto the curb, and paused for a moment. This was my place. My name was literally on the deed, But tonight, no one here would know that, not the doorman, not the host, not even my own daughter. Inside, the restaurant hummed with quiet elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over black tablecloths, fresh orchids centered every table, and the faint sound of live piano drifted from the corner. I spotted them immediately. Emily and Ethan standing near a prime window table looking nervous. My daughter wore a simple but elegant navy dress. She looked beautiful, glowing with that new marriage happiness. Ethan, tall and polished in a tailored suit, kept glancing toward the entrance. And then there were Vanessa and Frank Parker, already seated like they owned the room. Vanessa in a shimmering silver gown with diamonds flashing at her neck and wrists, Frank in a dark suit with a watch that probably cost more than most people's cars. They exuded money, the kind that announces itself loudly. Emily saw me first. Her smile faltered for just a second as her eyes took in my outfit, then she recovered and waved me over. Ethan's face tightened slightly. He swallowed hard, the way people do when they're bracing for embarrassment. "Mom, you made it," Emily said, leaning in for a quick hug. Her voice was warm, but I caught the strain underneath. Ethan greeted me politely, a fast peck on the cheek. "Nice to see you, Mrs. Sterling." Then he turned to his parents. "Mom, Dad, this is Emily's mother, Alina." Vanessa looked up slowly, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. I saw it all in that single glance. The slight narrowing of her eyes at my dress, the flick down to my scuffed shoes, the tiny curl of her lip. She extended a manicured hand, limp and brief. "Charmed," she said, the word dripping with anything but charm. Frank followed suit, a quick handshake, a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. No one stood to greet me properly. No one pulled out my chair. I sat at the end of the table, the furthest seat, like an afterthought. The waiter arrived with leather-bound menus. I opened mine and pretended to squint in confusion. Vanessa noticed immediately. "Do you need help, dear?" she asked, her tone sweet but edged with condescension. "The menu can be a bit overwhelming if you're not used to places like this." I gave her a timid smile. "Yes, please, it's all so fancy. I don't really know what half these words mean." She sighed softly, then proceeded to order for me something simple, not too expensive. The words hung in the air like a quiet insult. Emily stared at her napkin. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, and I just watched, taking it all in. But that was only the beginning. What Vanessa said next would make my blood run cold and set the stage for everything that followed. The appetizers had barely arrived when Vanessa leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light, and started what felt like a carefully rehearsed performance. She began innocently enough, talking about their flight from Chicago, the private lounge they'd used at the airport, how exhausting first-class travel could still be. Then she smoothly shifted into money. She mentioned the five-star hotel suite they were staying in, only about $1,500 a night, but the views are worth it. She talked about the designer boutiques they'd visited that afternoon, picked up a few little things, nothing major, just a handbag and some shoes. Her eyes kept flicking toward me, waiting for a reaction, waiting to see awe or envy on my face. I gave her nothing but a small nod and a quiet, "That sounds lovely." Frank joined in, describing the new Tesla he'd leased, fully loaded of course, and how real estate in Chicago was booming again. Vanessa smiled that tight, superior smile and turned directly to me. "And what about you, Alina? What do you do these days?" I lowered my gaze to my plate, playing the part perfectly. "Oh, I'm retired now. I used to do bookkeeping for a small firm, nothing exciting, just numbers, filing, simple office work." Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Frank. "How nice," she said, the words laced with pity. "Honest work is so important, isn't it? Though it must be hard these days, living on a fixed income." Emily shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Ethan stared at his wine glass. The main courses arrived, beautiful plates with tiny artistic portions. Vanessa pointed at her filet mignon. "This cut is $90 alone, but you really taste the difference when it's prime aged beef." She looked at my simpler grilled fish, the cheapest thing on the menu she'd ordered for me, and added, "Quality is worth paying for. One can't just eat anything, right?" I nodded meekly. "Of course." Then came the questions I'd been waiting for. Vanessa sipped her wine, a bottle that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, and asked, "Do you live alone, Alina?" Ethan mentioned a small apartment in Queens, was it? "Yes," I said softly. "Just a little one-bedroom, it's all I need." She gave a dramatic little sigh. It must be so difficult at your age managing on your own with limited means. Does your pension cover everything? I hesitated just long enough. I get by, I'm careful with money. Frank nodded approvingly as if I'd confirmed something. Vanessa leaned in again, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You're so brave, really. I admire women who struggle quietly. Though of course one always hopes to give their children more security, don't you think? A better start in life. There it was, the first direct jab. She was saying, out loud but wrapped in concern, that I hadn't provided enough for Emily, that I was the weak link. Emily's cheeks flushed. Ethan cleared his throat but stayed silent. Vanessa wasn't finished. She went on about how they'd paid for Ethan's private schools, his Ivy League college, the down payment on the condo he and Emily now shared, even most of their honeymoon in the Maldives. We believe in supporting our children properly, she said, looking straight at me. And you, Alina, were you able to help the young couple at all when they got married? I kept my voice small. I gave them what I could. A small gift. How thoughtful, Vanessa replied, her smile sharp as glass. Every little bit helps, doesn't it? Inside, a cold anger began to build, not hot and explosive, but steady and controlled. I'd spent decades in boardrooms full of people like this, and I knew exactly how their minds worked. They didn't just want to feel superior, they wanted everyone else to feel inferior. But the worst was still coming. Vanessa was about to make an offer that would change everything. Dessert had just been cleared when Vanessa set down her wine glass, folded her perfectly manicured hands, and adopted the expression of a concerned parent about to deliver difficult but necessary advice. The table had grown quieter. Even the piano seemed softer, as if the room itself sensed what was coming. Alina, she began, her voice warm but firm, now that we're all here as a family, I think it's important we speak openly. Ethan is our son and we adore him. Emily is a lovely girl and we're happy he chose her. But as parents, we always want the very best for our children's stability, security, a life free of unnecessary worries. Ethan tensed beside Emily. Mom, maybe this isn't? Vanessa raised a gentle but silencing hand. Let me finish, darling, it's important. She turned back to me, her eyes filled with practiced sympathy. Alina, I'm sure you did everything you could raising Emily alone. That takes strength and I respect it. But now the kids are building their future together. They have responsibilities, dreams, plans. And we've been fortunate enough to help them substantially. The down payment on their apartment, most of their wedding, their honeymoon, we're happy to do it. That's what parents do when they can. Frank nodded along, his face serious. Vanessa continued, but we also believe it's important that Ethan isn't carrying any extra burdens that could weigh on his marriage. The word burdens landed like a stone. Emily's eyes widened. She looked at me, then quickly away. I kept my voice soft. Burdens? Vanessa sighed, as if it pained her to say it. I don't want to be harsh, dear, but at your age, living alone on a limited income, it's natural for Emily to worry about you, to feel responsible. And we don't want that worry to affect their new life together. Do you understand? I nodded slowly. Perfectly? She smiled, relieved. Good, that's why Frank and I have discussed something. We'd like to help you financially. A modest monthly allowance, say $800, to make things more comfortable for you. Nothing extravagant, of course, but enough to ease the pressure. And in return, we'd only ask that you give the young couple a little more space. Not visit quite so often, not lean on them for support. Let them build their life without interference. The offer hung in the air like smoke. $800 a month to stay away. To disappear quietly so I wouldn't embarrass their perfect family with my poverty. Emily's face had gone pale. Ethan gripped his napkin under the table, knuckles white. Inside me, something shifted. The quiet anger I'd been holding turned ice cold and razor sharp. I'd heard enough. I'd seen enough. I placed my napkin gently on the table, sat back, and let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle over them. Then I spoke, not timidly, not softly, but with the calm, clear authority I use in boardrooms when closing multi-million-dollar deals. That's a very interesting offer, Vanessa, generous, even. But before I respond, I have a few questions. Vanessa blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in my tone. Of course. I leaned forward slightly. First, how much was that down payment you gave the kids? She straightened, proud. $250,000. And the honeymoon? About $60,000, a month in Europe and the Maldives. I nodded. So roughly 310,000 invested in their future. Impressive. Vanessa smiled, expecting praise. I smiled back, but mine was different. Tell me, Vanessa, did all that money buy you respect, or did it just buy compliance? The table went completely still. Because what I said next would turn their entire world upside down. The air at the table turned thick, almost heavy. Vanessa's confident smile faltered for the first time. Frank shifted in his seat, his brow creasing. Emily's eyes darted between us, wide with confusion and growing alarm. Ethan looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. I kept my voice steady, low, and utterly calm, the same tone I use when negotiating eight-figure contracts. You've spent the entire evening talking about money, I said, looking directly at Vanessa. How much things cost, how much you've spent, how much you have, but you haven't once asked how I'm doing, if I'm happy, if I'm healthy. If I have friends or peace or joy. You've only measured my worth by what you think is in my bank account. Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand politely but firmly, and she closed it again. And apparently, I continued, you decided I'm worth exactly $800 a month. That's the price you put on my silence, on my absence from my own daughter's life. Emily gasped softly. Mom, Vanessa recovered enough to bristle. That's not how I meant it at all. We were only trying to help. Help, I repeated, letting a small, cool smile touch my lips. By telling me I'm a burden. By suggesting I stay away so I don't drag down your son's perfect lifestyle? That's not help, Vanessa, that's control, wrapped in pity. Frank cleared his throat, leaning forward. Now wait just a minute, you're twisting my wife's words. We've been nothing but generous. Have you? I turned to him. Generous with your money, maybe, but not with respect, not with kindness, not with basic human decency towards someone you assumed had less than you. I paused, letting the words settle. Then I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and dropped the mask completely. Let me tell you a story, I said. 40 years ago, I was 23, pregnant, alone. The man who said he loved me vanished the moment he heard the news. My family turned their backs because I refused to fix the situation. I had nothing, no savings, no support, no plan. I worked as a hostess in a diner until the day I gave birth, then went back 2 weeks later. A neighbor watched Emily while I pulled double shifts. Emily was staring at me now, tears starting to form. She'd heard pieces of this before, but never like this. I studied at night, I went on. Took community college classes, then business courses. I learned everything I could: accounting, management, marketing, finance. I saved every penny. I climbed, hostess to server to shift supervisor to assistant manager to general manager. And then, 25 years ago, I took every dollar I had and opened my first restaurant. Vanessa's face had gone pale. Frank's jaw tightened. That restaurant became 2, then 5, then a brand. Today I own Sterling & Co. Every location, every recipe, every decision. This restaurant we're sitting in, Sterling's Pinnacle, it's mine. The building is mine. The company is worth over $400 million, and I clear more in a single month than most people make in 2 years. I let that sink in. Emily whispered, Mom, what? I looked at her gently. I earn $120,000 a month, sweetheart. After taxes, I always have. But I never told you because I didn't want you to grow up entitled. I wanted you to value hard work, humility, and heart, not a trust fund. Vanessa finally found her voice, shaky now. This is absurd. If you're so wealthy, why do you dress like that? Why live in Queens? I smiled, genuinely this time. Because real wealth isn't worn on your wrist or parked in your driveway. It's lived quietly, peacefully, without needing to prove anything to anyone. The table was silent. You could have heard a pin drop, but I wasn't finished yet. The best part, the moment that would truly devastate them, was still to come. Vanessa's face had drained of color. Her mouth opened and closed once like a fish gasping for air. Frank gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white against the dark wood. Emily's eyes were filled with tears, shock, pride, and something like betrayal all mixed together. Ethan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I wasn't done. That's why I came here tonight dressed like this, I said, gesturing to my faded dress and scuffed shoes. That's why I let you order for me, pity me, and offer me $800 to vanish from my daughter's life. I wanted to see who you really are when you think someone has nothing. And you showed me clearly. Vanessa finally found her voice, but it came out thin and shaky. This is ridiculous. You deceived us. You came here pretending to be poor just to trap us. That's manipulative. Dishonest. I met her eyes without flinching. Yes, I did pretend for one evening. You pretend every day behind your diamonds, your designer clothes, your stories about how much everything costs. You hide behind money because without it, you're afraid no one would respect you. I hid nothing tonight except the truth you never bothered to ask about. Frank tried to regain control. Even if what you say is true, and I'm not saying I believe it, this doesn't excuse how rude you've been. You misinterpreted our concern. Concern? I repeated softly. You called me a burden to my own daughter. You offered to pay me to stay away. You spent the entire dinner making sure I felt small. That wasn't concern, Frank. That was cruelty disguised as generosity. Emily reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell me? I squeezed her fingers gently. Because I didn't want you chasing money, sweetheart. I wanted you chasing meaning, character, kindness. The things no inheritance can give you. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice low. Mrs. Sterling, Alina, I don't know what to say. I feel sick. Vanessa wasn't ready to surrender. Fine, you're successful. Congratulations. But money doesn't buy class. Look at how you're behaving, humiliating us in public, throwing your wealth in our faces like some cheap revenge plot. I smiled calmly. I haven't thrown anything in your faces. You did that to yourselves. Every comment, every look, every offer of help, you revealed exactly who you are. I just gave you the chance. The waiter approached timidly. Is everything all right? Would you like anything else? Frank waved him away sharply. Just the check. The waiter nodded and disappeared. Vanessa sat rigid, her earlier confidence shattered. Frank pulled out his wallet, ready to pay and end the nightmare. But when the check came and their cards were declined one after another, the real humiliation was only beginning. The waiter returned with the leather folder and placed it discreetly in the center of the table. Frank, eager to end the evening and reclaim some dignity, pulled out his wallet and slid a sleek platinum card across the linen. This one, he said confidently. The waiter nodded and disappeared. Vanessa sat stiffly, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Emily was still holding my hand under the table, her fingers trembling. Ethan looked like he was replaying every moment of the night in his head, his face flushed with shame. Minutes ticked by intense silence. The waiter came back, expression carefully neutral. I'm sorry, sir. The card was declined. Frank's head snapped up. That's impossible, run it again. The waiter hesitated. We did, sir, twice. Frank's cheeks reddened. He pulled out another card, black, heavy metal, the kind that screams status, and handed it over. Use this one, it has no limit. The waiter left again. Vanessa leaned toward her husband and whispered, What's going on? Frank muttered back, probably a travel flag. Banks do that sometimes. It'll be fine. But when the waiter returned a second time, his face said everything before his words did. I'm very sorry, sir. This one was declined as well. Frank stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. This is absurd. I'm calling the bank right now. He stormed toward the entrance, phone already to his ear. Vanessa looked mortified, her perfect posture crumbling. This has never happened to us, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Never. I remained calm, watching the scene unfold. Emily whispered, Mom, should I? No, I said gently. Let it play out. The waiter hovered nearby, unsure what to do with the $2,500 check still unpaid. Vanessa stared at the tablecloth as if willing the floor to swallow her. Frank returned a few minutes later, face pale, phone clenched in his hand. Temporary security hold, he announced tightly, because we're traveling. It'll be cleared tomorrow. He looked at the waiter. Can we settle this in the morning? The waiter glanced toward the manager's station, my manager, though he didn't know I was listening. I'm afraid we require payment tonight, sir. Vanessa's voice cracked. We don't carry that kind of cash. The silence that followed was excruciating, then I spoke quietly but clearly. There's no need for any of this. I reached into my old canvas tote and pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I sent a discreet message to my general manager, who was on duty tonight and knew exactly who I was. Within seconds, the manager appeared at the table himself, professional and composed. Mrs. Sterling, he said with a warm nod to me, then turned to the group. I've been informed that tonight's dinner is compliments of the house. No charge at all, please consider it our gift. Vanessa and Frank stared at him, confused. The manager smiled politely. Miss Alina Sterling is the owner of Sterling & Co. This is her flagship restaurant. Everything here is on her tonight. The realization hit them like a wave. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Frank sank slowly back into his chair, defeated. I looked at them both and said softly, consider it a gesture of family goodwill. After all, we're all in this together now, aren't we? Vanessa's eyes filled with humiliated tears. Frank couldn't even meet my gaze, but the night wasn't over. What I said next would make sure they never forgot this dinner. Vanessa's eyes glistened with unshed tears of pure humiliation. Frank sat frozen, staring at the table as if it might offer him an escape route. The manager gave a polite bow and retreated, leaving us in a bubble of stunned silence. Emily's grip on my hand tightened. She was crying quietly now, a mix of shock, anger, and overwhelming pride. Ethan looked like he'd been punched in the gut. I turned to Vanessa and Frank, my voice calm but unyielding. Money doesn't buy class, I said. It doesn't buy empathy. It doesn't buy the ability to see people as human beings instead of status symbols. You have wealth, maybe a lot of it, but tonight you showed you don't have an ounce of what truly matters. Vanessa finally snapped. She stood up so fast her chair teetered. How dare you sit there and lecture us after lying all night? You set us up, you made fools of us on purpose. I didn't raise my voice. I gave you a mirror. You're the ones who looked into it and didn't like what you saw. I didn't make you sneer at my clothes. I didn't make you order the cheapest thing for me. I didn't make you offer to pay me to disappear. You did that all on your own. Frank tried one last time to salvage his pride. This is outrageous, we're leaving. He grabbed Vanessa's arm, but she shook him off, glaring at me. You think you're better than us because you built something? She hissed. You hid it like a coward and then sprang it like some cheap gotcha. That's not strength, that's pettiness. I looked at her steadily. If seeing how you treat someone you believe is beneath you feels like pettiness to you, then maybe you should ask yourself why. Emily finally spoke, her voice shaking but firm. Stop, just stop. She looked at her in-laws. You were cruel, you humiliated my mother all night, and now that you know who she really is, you're angry at her, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Ethan nodded slowly, finding his voice. She's right. Mom, Dad, what you said tonight, what you offered, it was wrong. I can't believe I sat here and let it happen. Vanessa's face crumpled. For the first time, the mask slipped completely. We were only trying to protect you both, she whispered. No, I said softly. You were trying to protect your image and you were willing to buy my silence to do it. Frank threw his napkin on the table. We're done here. He took Vanessa's elbow again, and this time she didn't resist. They gathered their things, her clutch, his phone, and started toward the exit without another word. Emily called after them. Wait, but Ethan touched her arm gently and shook his head. Let them go, he said quietly. As the Parkers disappeared through the doors, heads high but steps hurried, I felt the weight of the evening settle over me. Not victory, relief, clarity, and a deep sadness for what my daughter had just witnessed in the people she'd married into. Emily turned to me, tears streaming. Mom, I'm so sorry, I never knew about any of it. I pulled her into a hug. You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. But the night wasn't quite over. Outside, under the city lights, a conversation was waiting that would change everything for Emily and Ethan. Emily, Ethan, and I stepped out of Sterling's Pinnacle into the cool Manhattan night. The street hummed with taxis and late-night walkers, but the three of us stood on the sidewalk in a quiet bubble of our own. Emily's arm was linked through mine, her head resting on my shoulder as silent tears fell. Ethan stood close, hands in his pockets, looking lost. Mom, Emily whispered, I can't believe this. All these years you built all that and you never said a word. You let me think we were just getting by. I pulled her closer. I wanted you to grow up without the weight of expectations, Em. Without thinking life was about what you could buy or who you could impress. I wanted you to be free to choose who you wanted to be, not who money told you to be. She nodded against my shoulder. I get it now, and I'm so proud. But I'm also mad at myself for not seeing it, for letting them treat you like that tonight. Ethan finally spoke, his voice rough. I'm the one who should be sorry. I sat there, I heard every word, and I didn't stop it. I was embarrassed, I guess. Worried what my parents would think if you showed up looking too flashy. God, that sounds awful now. I looked at him kindly. You were caught between worlds, Ethan. It's hard when family pulls you in different directions. He shook his head. No excuse, what they said was disgusting, offering you money to stay away, calling you a burden. I've never been so ashamed of them. Emily wiped her eyes. Where did they go? They just left. Probably back to their hotel, Ethan said bitterly. To lick their wounds and figure out how to spin this so it's somehow your fault, Alina. A cab pulled up. I'd called for one quietly on my phone. I turned to them both. Come home with me tonight if you want, or go back to your place. But whatever you do, talk, really talk, set boundaries now while it's fresh, because if you don't, this will happen again. Emily hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom, more than ever. I love you too, sweetheart, always. Ethan stepped forward and hugged me as well, awkward at first, then genuine. Thank you for everything, for showing us what real strength looks like. I smiled. You'll both be okay, you're good people, just decide what kind of life and what kind of family you want to build. They watched me get into the cab, waving as it pulled away. I rolled down the window for one last look at my daughter, standing there with her husband under the city lights, holding each other like they were anchoring in a storm. The cab merged into traffic, and I leaned back against the seat, the adrenaline finally fading. But as we headed toward Queens, the driver, a kind-eyed older man with gray hair and calloused hands, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Rough night, ma'am? He asked gently. I let out a small laugh. You could say that. He nodded. You look like someone who just won a war but doesn't feel much like celebrating. He had no idea how right he was, and what he said next would stay with me long after the ride ended. The cab hummed through the city streets, lights blurring past the windows as we left Manhattan behind. I was quiet at first, processing everything, the confrontation, the revelations, the looks on their faces. The driver didn't push. He just drove, giving me space. Then he spoke again, his voice warm and gravelly from years on the road. You know, ma'am, I've been doing this job 30 years. I've seen every kind of night, weddings, breakups, celebrations, fights. But you've got that look, like you just spoke a truth nobody wanted to hear, but everybody needed to. I met his eyes in the mirror and smiled faintly. Something like that. He chuckled softly. Good for you. Most people swallow it down, stay polite, let the bullies win because it's easier. But you stood up, I can tell. His words warmed me more than I expected. It wasn't easy, I admitted. Their family now through my daughter. Family's complicated, he said. But blood or marriage, respect's not automatic, it's earned. And from what I'm guessing, those folks thought money earned it for them. You showed 'em different. I nodded. I pretended to be poor tonight just to see how they'd treat me. He let out a low whistle. Brilliant, risky but brilliant, and worse than I feared, I said quietly. They offered me money to stay out of my daughter's life. He shook his head. Lord, some people think cash fixes everything. Buys love, buys silence, buys superiority. But it don't buy character. Exactly. We turned into Queens, the streets quieter, more familiar. He glanced back again. You rich? I laughed softly. Depends on your definition. Fair enough, he said, but the real rich ones. They don't need to prove it. They tip well, talk kind, and go home to peace. You strike me as that kind. The cab pulled up to my building, a modest brick apartment house, nothing fancy, just home. I handed him $100 for a $30 fare. Keep the change, I said. You earned it tonight. He took it gratefully. Thank you, ma'am, and hey, one more thing, don't regret a word you said back there. Truth hurts sometimes, but it heals too. You did right by your daughter, by yourself. I stepped out, the night air cool on my face. Thank you, I needed to hear that. As the cab pulled away, I stood on the sidewalk looking up at my window. Simple, quiet, mine. Inside, I kicked off my shoes, changed into comfortable clothes, made tea, and sat by the window. My phone buzzed, a text from Emily, home safe, talking with Ethan, we love you. So proud to be your daughter. Another from Ethan, I'm sorry for tonight. Thank you for showing us what matters, I'll do better. I smiled, tears coming now not from pain, but release. Days later, Ethan came to see me alone. He wanted to apologize properly and ask for guidance on how to break the cycle his parents had built. But that visit, and the deeper healing it brought, would change everything for our family. 3 days later, my doorbell rang on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. I opened it to find Ethan standing there alone, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, no trace of the polished suit from that night. He held a small bouquet of flowers and looked nervous, like a kid about to confess something. "Hi, Alina," he said softly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course." He handed me the flowers, simple daisies, my favorite. "These are for you, and I'm here to apologize properly, not just for that night, but for not seeing who you are sooner, for letting my parents treat you that way." I took the flowers and led him to the living room. We sat, me on my old sofa, him across in the armchair that had been my mother's. "Ethan, you don't, please," he interrupted gently. "I need to say this. Emily and I have talked nonstop since that dinner about everything. My parents called the next day, angry, defensive, saying you manipulated them, that we were ungrateful. They even threatened to cut us off financially if we didn't see reason." I raised an eyebrow. "And," he smiled faintly, "we told them no, that money doesn't buy our loyalty or our silence. We set boundaries, no more comments about wealth, no more controlling our decisions, no more judging people by what they have. If they can't respect that, we'll keep our distance." They didn't take it well. My mom hasn't spoken to me since. "That's hard," I said sincerely. "It is," he admitted, "but it's also freeing. For the first time, I feel like I'm choosing my own life, not the one they scripted for me." He leaned forward, earnest. "Alina, I want to learn from you how to live with dignity without flashing it, how to build something real, how to value people for who they are, not what they own. Emily and I want to break this cycle. We don't want to raise kids, if we have them, thinking money defines worth." I smiled, touched. "You're already breaking it, Ethan. Just by being here, by choosing honesty over comfort." We talked for hours about my early struggles, the risks I took, the quiet pride in living simply despite success. He listened like a student, asking questions, taking it all in. When he left, he hugged me tightly. "Thank you for that night, for the truth, for showing us another way." After he was gone, Emily texted. "He told me everything. We're both so grateful. Love you forever, Mom." I sat by my window as the sun set over Queens, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. My phone stayed quiet, no more rushed apologies from that side of the family. Vanessa and Frank remained who they were, rich in dollars, poor in spirit. But that was no longer my burden. I'd spoken my truth, protected my peace, strengthened my bond with Emily, and gained a son-in-law who wanted to grow. I never pretended to be poor again. I didn't need to. The lesson was learned. The masks were off. And in my simple apartment with my old furniture and quiet life, I had everything that mattered: dignity, love, authenticity, and freedom. Real wealth isn't in bank accounts or restaurant empires. It's in peace, in knowing who you are, in loving without conditions, and in teaching the next generation to do the same. That night at Sterling's Pinnacle didn't just expose the Parkers, it liberated us all, and that, more than any fortune, was priceless. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story touched you, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What would you have done in my place? Let's talk in the comments.